My wife won nearly $12 million. That same night, her family stood in my living room and told me to leave the house I had built board by board. 8 years of sweat and love meant nothing. They thought I'd walk away broke and silent. But I held one paper in my hand, and that paper would turn their laughter into fear. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room, the evening light slipping through the curtains in thin, broken lines across the wooden floor. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. On the mantel above the fireplace stood our wedding photo, framed in walnut I had carved myself. I looked at that picture until my eyes blurred, until the smiles I once believed in felt like a cruel joke. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, each one as clear as if it had happened yesterday. I remembered writing a check for $60,000 so Laura could finish her MBA. We didn't have that kind of money lying around, so I cashed out part of my retirement savings. I told myself it was an investment in our future. She said she'd pay me back in love, that her degree would bring us both security. I believed her. Then I remembered the car, a brand new sedan, $28,000 at the time. She needed something reliable, she said, to commute to the art gallery she loved. I handed over the down payment without hesitation, proud that I could provide. And how could I forget the wedding itself? An event that looked like something out of a glossy magazine, a hotel ballroom lit by chandeliers, champagne flowing like water. I wrote checks until my hand cramped, but I told myself it was worth it, because love was worth it. I thought of all those dollars spent, every cent meant to build a life together. And now, in the cruelest twist, the very people who toasted me that night were the same ones who told me to get out, to leave behind the house I had poured my soul into. That house was more than brick and wood. It was me. Every nail I hammered, every tile I laid, every gallon of paint I rolled onto the walls was a piece of my own history. The market valued it at $550,000, but to me, it was priceless. I could still see the sweat dripping from my forehead as I knelt to install the hardwood floors in the living room, plank by plank. I could still smell the fresh cedar from the porch railing I built one summer afternoon, the sun burning my shoulders until the skin peeled. I gave this house not just money, but my body, my energy, my heart. It had been the center of our family life, the place where birthdays were celebrated, where Thanksgiving turkey filled the kitchen with warmth. Now it was treated as a possession I no longer had a claim to. The idea that my name could be erased from it so easily filled me with a rage I could taste like metal in my mouth. For days after the betrayal, I lived in a fog of shock and disbelief. I kept asking myself, how could they do this? How could Laura, the woman I once trusted with everything, look me in the eye and say the winnings were hers alone? It wasn't just about the money. It was the contempt in her voice, the way her family circled her as if I were some intruder in my own home. They saw me as a man who could be discarded, a piece of furniture to be moved out once the room was redecorated. I thought about my late wife, Margaret, the woman I had lost years ago, long before I married Laura. I whispered to her in the stillness of the night, "If you were still here, you would tell me not to let them trample over me. You would remind me of who I am." Talking to her photograph brought tears to my eyes, but also strength. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just greed, it was disdain, the kind of disdain that sees a man's worth only in dollars. That was what broke me, and that was what would drive me to fight. The room itself became a witness to my pain. The ticking of the wall clock was loud, each second a reminder of time wasted on people who never valued me. The evening sun left shadows like scars on the carpet. My hands trembled as I held the wedding band, turning it over and over, its gold now a dull reminder of vows broken. The chair I sat in creaked under me, the same chair where I used to read the paper with a cup of coffee while Laura painted her nails across the room. Every object in that living room, from the photo album stacked on the side table to the old lamp I had rewired, seemed to mock me with memories of a life that was gone. I felt alone, abandoned, invisible in a house that should have been my fortress. One night, as I opened the drawer of an old oak cabinet, my fingers brushed against something stiff. I pulled out a folder, yellowed at the edges, and there it was. The prenuptial agreement I had signed years ago under the stern gaze of Laura's father. I remembered that day so clearly now, The way he leaned across the lawyer's desk and said, "It's just to protect the family assets, nothing personal." I was so blinded by love that I nodded and signed without reading carefully. But as I stared at the document again, my heart quickened. There, in black and white, were words that might hold the key to everything. Any prizes or winnings acquired during the marriage shall be considered marital property. The very clause they had insisted upon to protect themselves was now my shield. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with the first spark of hope. Their arrogance had sown the seed of their own downfall. The house was quiet as I sat there holding that document. The creak of the wooden floor echoed as I paced the room, the same floor I had laid down with my own hands. My eyes wandered to the photos on the wall. Laura smiling with her family, her father holding a glass of champagne, all of them looking down at me in those frozen moments. I felt the old anger rise again, but now it was tempered with something sharper: determination. The rocking chair in the corner, where I used to sit with Margaret long ago, swayed slightly as if nodding to me. I imagined her voice whispering, "Now you see, Michael. Now you see." I walked to the phone on the side table, the one that still had a cord curling like a snake, and I picked it up. My hands no longer shook. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, the number of an old friend who knew a lawyer, a good one. The line rang, and I could feel the weight of my decision settle in. This wasn't over. They thought they had pushed me out for good, that I would slink away into silence. But I had found my leverage, hidden in their own words, sealed with their own signatures. As the phone connected, I told myself this was the beginning of the fight, and I promised Margaret out loud this time, I will not let them erase me. I will not let them win. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke at dawn with the same sentence beating in my head. They think I will walk away. They think I will disappear. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the thin blanket bunched around my knees, and stared at the prenup I had found in my old oak cabinet. The paper felt heavier than paper should have. It felt like a tool. It felt like a key. I read the clause again, slow and careful, the way a carpenter checks a level before he drives a nail. Any prizes or winnings acquired during the marriage shall be considered marital property. I said it out loud, testing each word. I wanted to hear it in the air. I wanted to hear that I had not imagined it. Then I folded the paper along its old crease, slipped it into a manila folder, and told myself this was the day I would stop bleeding and start rebuilding. I called the number my old friend had given me. The receptionist sounded brisk but kind. She said Mr. Reed could see me at 9:30. I shaved with a disposable razor, nicked my chin, and pressed a washcloth to the little red dot until the bleeding stopped. I wore my cleanest shirt and the boots that had carried me through years of job sites. My back hurt the way it always does when the weather is about to turn, but I stood straighter in the mirror. I tucked the prenup into a battered leather satchel and headed out into the humid Orlando morning. Thomas Reed's office was on the second floor of a brick building that looked out over a row of live oaks and a parking lot full of sun-baked sedans. The waiting room smelled like coffee and paper. He came out to greet me himself, hand extended, eyes sharp but friendly. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of man who takes notes with a fountain pen and does not waste words. We sat across from each other at a walnut desk, and I told him the story without rushing. My wife. Her numbers are hitting close to 12 million. Her family arrived with their smiles and their shadows. The way they surrounded me in my own living room and told me to leave. The house I had built, priced at $550,000 on paper, but a lifetime in my bones. The way the laughter turned to orders. The stare from her father. The smirk from her brother. The cold inside my chest that would not warm. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I slid the prenup across the desk, he put on his glasses and read in silence. His finger traced each paragraph like a carpenter tracing grain. When he reached the clause, he tapped it once, gentle but firm, as if he had found a stud hidden behind drywall. He read it again, then looked up at me. "This is very clear," he said. "They drafted this to protect what they believed they already had. They did not think about the future. The language does not care about their feelings now. It says what it says." I sat still. I let the words sink in. He asked for copies. I gave him the original to scan. He told me what we needed next: bank statements, proof of purchase history, any evidence that lottery tickets had been bought with the joint Wells Fargo checking account, receipts, if I had them. I told him Laura had bought tickets for years, always the same numbers, and almost always with that card from our wallet bowl by the front door. He nodded. We will ask for records. We will move quietly, but we will move. You do not speak to them today. You speak to them through me. When I left his office, the sun had climbed, and the heat on the pavement wavered like steam. I drove to the bank with the calm of a man starting a long job. The branch manager knew me from years of deposits after Friday paychecks. I told her I needed statements printed from the last 5 years for the joint account. I told her I needed copies of debit card transactions that showed purchases labeled Florida Lottery or State Lottery, and I needed them printed, stamped, and initialed. She looked at me with concern, but she did her work. Paper slid out of the printer in a steady hum. The stack grew thick. Each page was a line of numbers, but to me, each line was a memory. $20 here, $10 there, a run of Saturdays with $15 at the Wawa on Colonial. I asked for copies on a flash drive, too. She handed me an envelope and said, "I hope everything works out." I thanked her and felt the first real breath of the day. That afternoon, I drove back to the house to get the last of my tools and a box of winter clothes. I told myself I would be quick. I told myself I would not look around. I parked by the curb and walked up the driveway. The garage door was open. Music thumped low from a Bluetooth speaker. Stephen stood there with his arms folded, the kind of pose men adopt when they want to fill as much space as possible. Richard was next to him, dressed in a neat golf shirt, smelling like cologne and condescension. On a folding table between them lay a stack of papers and a new lock set with a shiny brass knob. Stephen smiled without warmth. "This is a surprise," he said. Richard gave me a slow once-over and said, "We were just about to change the locks." I told them I was only there for a box. I kept my voice even. I kept my hands at my sides. Richard stepped closer. "Michael, this house is Laura's. You are a guest at best. Do yourself a favor and make it easy. No one wants an ugly scene." Stephen chuckled. "And forget about money. There is nothing for you here." The words sounded rehearsed, said many times in their heads, the kind of words men enjoy saying because they are trying them out, like suits in a mirror. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a hot, steady anger. I remembered the nights I knelt on this very concrete floor, sorting screws into old peanut butter jars, planning the kitchen remodel. I remembered the morning I carried the new drywall on my shoulder while Laura slept late. I remembered aligning cabinet faces until the seams disappeared. I looked at the brass knob on the table and thought about how easily they believed a new lock could erase a man's life. I walked past them to the storage shelf. Stephen moved to block me. I stopped, met his eyes, and said, "I am here for a box." I made my voice low and clear. He held my gaze for a second too long, then stepped aside with a snort. I lifted the box and felt the familiar pull in my lower back. It grounded me. I turned and looked at Richard. "I paid the mortgage when she worked part-time. I installed the floors you stand on. Do not talk to me about claims." He smiled the way men smile when they think they are already winning. "All the more reason to leave with dignity," he said. He was wrong. He was wrong about dignity. He was wrong about everything. I walked past them with the box in my arms. In the doorway, I paused and looked back once, not at them, but at the garage itself. The pegboard with outlines of tools, the hook where the extension cord hung in a neat loop, the broom in the corner. The life I had made was organized and visible. I crossed the threshold without another word. In the car, I set the box on the passenger seat and sat with both hands on the wheel. I did not start the engine. I let the anger shift into fuel. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to raise my voice, to throw something, to make the story easy for them. I would not. I said it out loud. They think I am weak. They think I am alone. They do not know what they put in my hands. Saying it helped. Saying it turned the heat into a steady flame. I drove back to the motel and spread the bank statements out on the small table by the window. The papers formed a timeline, charges from gas stations, grocery stores, and the hardware store. And regular as a heartbeat, the entries that mattered most. Florida lottery, state lottery, $10, $20, sometimes $30 when the jackpot rolled over. I circled the ones that matched the dates Laura had posted her little jokes online. The day she wrote, "Someday these numbers will love me back." The day she said, "Just a ticket and a dream." The circle of ink felt like a building. It felt like laying tile, each circle a piece locking into the next. I took photos of each page with my phone. I backed them up to a thumb drive. I emailed Thomas Reed with a simple note. "Found what you asked for. More coming." Then I called Thomas. He picked up on the second ring. I told him about the bank records. I told him about the garage. He did not waste time with outrage. He said, "Good. We will stay quiet. I will file a preservation notice so they do not destroy anything. I will request the store's camera footage where the ticket was sold. Sometimes those are available. I will subpoena the bank if needed for certified logs. You do not contact them. If they contact you, you forward everything to me." His voice was steady, the way a level shows the bubble centered. He asked how I was. I said, "Mad, but clear." He said, "Good. Anger passes. Paper remains." When I hung up, I felt something I had not felt in days. Control. That night, I allowed myself to imagine the other side of this. I saw Laura in a courthouse hallway, trying to look at me like a stranger while a judge addressed us both. I saw Richard checking his watch while a clerk read a docket number. I saw Stephen trying to laugh too loudly. I saw the moment when a simple sentence would cut through all of it. Any prizes or winnings acquired during the marriage shall be considered marital property. It was not revenge I wanted. It was recognition. It was the weight of my life placed back in my own hands where it belonged. The next morning, I went to a different bank branch to request copies again, just in case the first set got lost. Redundancy is a habit you learn in construction. You measure twice, you cut once. You keep spares in a labeled bin. The teller printed the same stack and stamped each page with today's date. I asked for a letter on bank letterhead confirming that the account was joint and active during the dates in question. She brought over the manager, a man with careful hair and a careful tone. He read the request form Thomas had emailed to me, nodded, and printed the letter. He typed the words I needed. He initialed them. Then he slid the letter under the plexiglass and said, "Do you want a second copy for your attorney?" I said, "Yes." He made another copy and stapled his business card to it. Paper remains. I drove to the convenience store on Colonial, where Laura liked to buy her tickets. The same cashier was there, the young woman with the bright nails who always called me sir, even when I told her she did not have to. I bought a coffee and asked if the manager was around. He was. I explained that my attorney might request footage from the day in October when a ticket had been purchased. He said the system only saved for a few weeks unless they marked a date. I felt my stomach dip. I told him the exact day and time window. He walked to the back, returned with a notepad, and wrote it down. "I will see what I can do," he said. "No promises, but I will look." I thanked him. I stepped back into the sun and stood on the sidewalk and thought about how evidence is like framing in a roof. You do not need every piece to hold the shape, but you need enough, correctly placed, to carry the load. That afternoon, Laura posted a photo from the mall at Millennia, designer bags at her feet, a flute of champagne in her hand. The caption said, "New beginnings." Stephen commented with a string of fire emojis. Margaret wrote, "So proud of you." Richard posted a toast emoji. I stared at the picture and felt the old ache rise, but I noticed the little details my anger had ignored before. The ring Laura wore was the one I had given her on our 5th anniversary. The bracelet had been her mother's, a gift from their old world to the new. The background showed a shop window with a reflection. In that reflection was the shape of a man holding the phone to take the picture. His arm was around her shoulders. I let the ache pass through me. Then I saved the image, not for jealousy, but for the timestamp. Every photo tells a story. Sometimes the story is money being spent as if it were clean. That evening, I sat with a notebook and wrote down the plan in plain words so I would not forget anything and so my mind would stop spinning. Call the bank, call a lawyer, gather statements, ask for a letter, visit the store, save social posts. Do not engage with them except through counsel. Keep receipts. Keep calm. Sleep when I can, eat what I can, walk when the fear spikes, pray when the anger surges. I placed the notebook next to the stack of papers. I laid the prenup on top like the cover of a book. Then I turned off the lamp and stood by the window. The motel parking lot glowed under the sodium lights. A man in a red shirt smoked a cigarette and waved the smoke away from his own face. Somewhere, a television played a game show, the sound thin and bright through cheap walls. I breathed in, I breathed out. I whispered to Margaret again, I am not done. Over the next 2 days, I moved with purpose. I opened a new checking account in my name only. I changed the passwords on my email and my cloud storage. I boxed up the last of my personal photos and left them with a friend who had a spare room and a kind wife. I made a copy of the prenup and put it in a safe deposit box at a different bank. Thomas sent me a list of stores where Laura had purchased tickets over the years, gathered from the statements. I went to each one in turn, asked each manager the same questions, kept my voice polite, and wrote down names and dates in my notebook. Some could help, some could not. Each time I thanked them. Each time I walked out into the heat and told myself that nothing about this needed to be perfect. It only needed to be enough. On the third morning, Thomas called and said he wanted to meet in person. His voice had a small lift in it. I drove to his office and found him with a legal pad half covered in neat lines and arrows. He had printed my bank statements again. He had run a highlighter down the columns and marked the relevant entries in green. "You did well," he said. "This gives us a foundation." He pointed to the clause in the prenup again and said, "And this gives us structure." Then he leaned back and told me the next steps. He would draft a petition. He would file motions to preserve assets. He would request discovery. He would handle the noise. "There will be noise," he said. "They will bluster. They may threaten to smear you. You will not respond. You will let the paper speak." I nodded. My mouth was dry. He handed me a bottle of water. I drank. He asked how I was sleeping. I said, "Enough." It was almost true. He smiled, not to be friendly, but to show me he heard the truth under my words. Before I left, he asked one more question. Had Laura opened any new accounts that I knew of? I told him I did not know, but I guessed she had. He said he would find out through discovery. He said that even if she used another bank for the deposit, the years of purchases from the joint account tied the winnings to the marriage. "It is like concrete," he said. "You poured it long ago. It is set. They can chip at it, but the slab holds." The image pleased me. Something solid under my feet. Not anger, not fear, concrete. When I stepped out into the hallway, I felt the air on my face like a small blessing. I was almost to the stairs when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit the screen, a screenshot of Laura's latest post. "Champagne again." A caption that said, "Finally free." I stared at the word and felt a flash of old hurt. Then I put the phone in my pocket and kept walking. Free means something different when you have earned it. Free means something different when you have paid for it with your own hands. On my way back to the motel, I decided to stop by the house one last time for a set of chisels I loved, old steel that holds an edge the way a good memory holds a lesson. I told myself I would be quick. The sun was low, the street was quiet, the garage door was shut, but the side gate was open. I walked around and peered through the kitchen window. The counters were crowded with glossy shopping bags. A pair of designer heels lay on the island like some trophy. The refrigerator door was splashed with new magnets, tourist places Laura had never mentioned before. I stood there longer than I meant to. Then I heard a voice inside. "Richard," he said. "He will settle. He always does." Stephen answered, "And if he does not, we will break him in court. Daniel said so." I did not move. I did not breathe. Then Laura's voice drifted in, soft and tired. "Just make it go away." The words were small, but they were the most honest thing I had heard in days. I stepped back from the window. I walked away without the chisels. I did not need them tonight. I had something sharper. Back at the motel, the room felt different. The bed was still narrow, the lamp still buzzed, but the space had purpose now. I laid out the new letter from the bank manager and the stamped statements, and I placed a fresh pad of paper beside them. I wrote one line across the top. "They think I am a weak man." Then I wrote the second line. They are about to learn. I repeated the phrase until the ink pressed darker into the page. I wanted the words to feel carved, not written. I wanted my own voice to hear them when I woke in the middle of the night. I set an alarm for 6. I slept for a few hours. At dawn, I walked outside and watched the sky go from gray to pink to Florida blue. I drank bad coffee and let it warm my stomach. Then I called Thomas and asked if he wanted me to deliver the documents or scan them. He said, "Bring them. I like the weight of originals." I smiled at that. A man after my own heart. At 8:30, I was in his conference room, paper clipped into bundles. He slid a signature page across to me, the first of many, he said. It was a request for discovery and a notice to preserve. My name looked small on the bottom line, but my hand was steady as I signed. He collected the pages and tucked them into a file folder with my last name on the tab. He said, "This will not be quick, but it will be certain." I nodded. I did not need to be quick. I needed to be certain. After I left his office, I parked under a tree and sat in the truck for a while. The air smelled like cut grass from a crew working a median. A boy on a bicycle rode past, backpack bouncing. Life went on. I opened my phone and scrolled through my camera roll. Photos of the bank statements, photos of the prenup clause, zoomed in until the words filled the screen. A shot of the convenience store door with the hours posted. A photo I had taken of my own living room months ago. The hardwood floor gleaming after I oiled it on a Saturday afternoon. I stared at that floor, the grain running like a river, and I told myself the truth. I had loved this house. I had loved my wife. I had loved the idea that we were building something together. They chose to cut me out. They chose to forget the hands that built what they now stand on. That choice would cost them. Not because I wanted it to, because that is how truth works when you give it paper and time. Late in the afternoon, Thomas emailed me a secure link. Inside was a draft of the petition. I read each line. The language was cold, even clinical. It did not use words like heart or betrayal. It used words like property and asset and evidence. It cited dates and amounts and account numbers. It cited the clause. It asked for equitable distribution. It asked for preservation. It asked the court to recognize the same thing my body already knew. I typed a reply that said, "I approve." Then I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet. Night came early in my head. I turned off the lamp and lay back on the bed. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a question mark. I watched it while the air conditioner rattled. I told myself a simple sentence, "They do not know what I hold." Then I let myself add the second sentence, the one that makes the first one matter. "They will know soon." I did not mean a scene or a fight or a speech. I meant a document. I meant a line in a filing. I meant a judge reading out loud what I had been saying to myself in the dark. I closed my eyes and slept without dreams. In the morning, an email from the bank manager waited for me. He had added a note to the earlier letter, clarifying that the joint account debit card ending in the numbers I knew had been used for lottery purchases on specific dates. He attached a table with times and amounts for the last year. I printed it in the motel lobby. The numbers looked neat and small, but to me they were loud as a hammer on a stud. I slid the pages into my folder and called Thomas to let him know I would drop them off. He said, "Good. This is the kind of corroboration that makes a story become fact in a courtroom." I liked the way he said corroboration, a word like a beam. As I walked back to my truck, the sun bright and high, I felt the day tilt toward something new. I had not won anything yet. Laura still had her circle, Richard still had his voice, Stephen still had his laugh. But the balance had shifted inside me. The grief had cooled into resolve. The fear had widened into awareness. I opened the door, slid the folder onto the passenger seat, and rested my hand on it for a moment. Paper, weight, proof. I spoke out loud, not yelling, not whispering. "They think I have already lost. They think the game is over. They do not know the game has just begun." I started the engine and pulled into traffic. I did not look back at the motel. I did not look back at the house. I drove toward the lawyer's office with the same feeling I get when I stand at the base of a frame and look up at the skeleton of a roof. You can see the lines before the shingles go on. You can see the shape of the shelter. You can see where the light will fall through windows that are not yet cut. You can see where a man will one day set down his keys and call a place his own. I held the wheel in both hands. I kept my eyes on the road. I was ready for what came next. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the alarm, my mind already pacing the hallway I would soon walk. The motel room was still, the air conditioner humming like a distant saw. I laid the prenup on the desk, smoothed the paper with my palm, and breathed the way Thomas taught me to breathe when the noise outside tried to climb inside. In through my nose, slow. Out through my mouth, slower. Today, the plan we built in Chapter 3 would stop being a plan. Today, it would move. At 8, I pulled into Thomas Reed's lot and watched the wind lift the live oaks shading the brick building. He met me in the lobby with a firm handshake and eyes that held steady. We did not waste time. In the conference room, he slid a stack of documents across the table, each clipped and labeled. "This is our filing," he said, calm as a level bubble. "The prenup clause first, then the bank statements, then the affidavit from the branch manager confirming the debit card used for lottery purchases belonged to your joint Wells Fargo account." He placed a pen at the top as if setting a nail. We file, we argue, we let paper speak. I read the first page again, even though I already knew every line. Any prizes or winnings acquired during the marriage shall be considered marital property. The words were a plain hammer, swinging true. Thomas added, "We'll attach a screenshot of her shopping post for the timestamp, not the bags, the date. It helps show commingling, and we will notice the store for footage if any exists." He watched my face. "You ready?" I said I was. We drove to the courthouse in separate cars. I followed his silver Chevy down Orange Avenue. The courthouse rose like an old ship pulled onto land, pale stone and tall windows. Inside, the hall smelled like coffee and floor wax. Lawyers rolled carts of red-welled folders. The clerk behind the glass checked our number and pointed us to a courtroom with dark wood and quiet benches. The door was heavy and warm under my hand. Laura sat at the defense table in a cream suit that looked expensive and tired at the same time. Richard kept his jaw set tight enough to crack a walnut. Margaret held a tissue she folded and unfolded until it looked like lace. Stephen tried to smile, but only showed teeth. Daniel Clark, their attorney, stood smooth and polished, the kind of man who lets his cufflinks talk. Judge Eleanor Wright took the bench at 9 sharp. Wood panels framed her like a picture of order. She called the case. Thomas stood for me. Daniel stood for Laura. The judge said we would proceed on our motions: recognition of the prenup language, preservation of assets, and preliminary findings on the status of the lottery proceeds, with discovery to follow. Her voice was steady, not unkind, not soft. Before the argument began, the bailiff carried a thick envelope to our table. No return address. My name scrawled across it. Thomas slid a thumb under the flap, pulled out a letter, and scanned the first paragraph. His mouth thinned. He tilted it so I could read. It was from Daniel's office, dated last night, accusing me of a pattern of emotional abuse and financial control, and warning that public disclosure would follow if I did not withdraw improper claims. I felt heat climb my neck. It was not fear. It was a hard, bitter sadness that this was the road they chose. Thomas touched the corner of the page. "Noise," he whispered. "We will keep to the road." Daniel began his opening with a tone made for microphones. He spoke of luck and personal intuition, of a family tradition of numbers passed down like recipes. He called my claim an opportunistic attempt to ride a windfall. He said the funds had been placed in a separate account. He suggested the house was hers by deed and destiny. His voice tried to turn the room into a story he could narrate. Thomas stood and did not change his tone from the one he used with me. He walked the judge through the clause. He laid the statements beside the clause. He pointed to the pattern of purchases, the uniform use of our joint debit card over the years. He handed up the affidavit. He offered the screenshot for the date only. "We are not here to try their taste in champagne," he said. "We are here to apply a contract." The judge nodded once. Daniel sighed and said the clause was meant for raffles and small prizes, not a multi-million jackpot no one could foresee. He spoke about intention, about romance, about the sanctity of personal luck. Thomas answered with 8 words. The contract says any. The law reads any. He did not look at Daniel. He looked at the clause. The judge looked at it too. Daniel pivoted. He lifted a binder with shiny tabs and said the court must consider a broader context of control. He raised the letter from the envelope and began to summarize. Thomas rose. Objection. Not noticed, irrelevant to the status of funds, and prejudicial. The judge held up her palm. Sustained. Counsel will confine argument to the motions. Daniel nodded, smoothed his tie, and sat. Thomas asked to approach with one more exhibit, Daniel's own early motion, filed in November. He turned to page 2 and read a single sentence aloud, even and plain. The lottery ticket at issue was purchased during the marriage with funds from the marital estate. He let silence sit. Paper makes its own kind of sound when it lands. Daniel blinked. He tried to call it a drafting error, a misunderstanding, a clerk's oversight. The judge did not let the words grow. The sentence is plain, she said. I will weigh it with the rest. Richard shifted behind Laura. The leather squeaked. Stephen leaned forward to whisper. Margaret stared at her folded tissue as if it might give her different news. The judge asked whether Laura wanted to testify for the limited purpose of asset questions. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Laura stepped to the stand, swore in, and sat. Her voice was thin at first. It grew when she described the day the numbers hit, the ticket warm in her hand, the calls, the champagne, the noise. Thomas kept his questions simple, and simple questions have weight. On October 8th, did you buy the ticket at Wawa on Colonial? She said yes. What card did you use? The joint debit card. Into what account did the winnings go? My personal account. Did you use those funds to buy a BMW for approximately $85,000? Yes. Did you deposit a Winter Park condo? Yes. Did you consult your husband? No. Each answer was a nail set and tapped once. Daniel tried to soften with intention. He asked whether she had planned to keep the prize separate, whether the celebration had blurred rules, and whether emotions had carried her. She nodded where a story wanted nods. I did not blame her for wanting a gentler script. Floors can be sanded, rot cannot. Intentions are not wood, actions are. Thomas ended with one last clean board. Did you tell Michael the money was yours alone and that he should leave the house? Her eyes flicked to Richard, then Daniel, then down. Yes, she said. The word did not echo. It did not need to. We broke for lunch. The hallway smelled like coffee gone old. Richard stepped too close. Enjoying yourself? He whispered, as if the whisper made him noble. You think this makes you a man? I kept my voice low. It makes me a husband who read what you made me sign. Stephen muttered something crude. Margaret's eyes were wet. She said, Please, we can settle this. And her hand trembled, tissue crushed small. I said, You know how to reach my lawyer, and walked away before the past could tangle my feet. Downstairs I bought a turkey sandwich that tasted like cardboard and a bottle of water that tasted like silence. I sat on a bench and watched white clouds build over the city. Thomas joined me with a coffee he did not finish. You did well, he said. Saying nothing is a skill. I told him about the envelope again, the words crawling under my skin. He nodded. I will make a record. Judges see these tactics. Keep your center. I breathed in. I breathed out. Back in the courtroom, the air felt heavier, as if the walls leaned in to listen. Judge Wright summarized the filings, the exhibits, and the testimony. She spoke first about the prenup, plain language controls. Any means any. She spoke about the bank statements, pattern and weight. She mentioned the affidavit. Then she lifted Daniel's early motion with 2 fingers, like a teacher holding a note passed in class. Counsel's own filing acknowledges the marital source of purchase, she said. I am capable of assessing it with the rest of the record. Daniel stood to object to characterization. The judge said, Your filing speaks for itself. Richard coughed hard into his fist, as if trying to swallow something stinging. Laura gripped the table until her knuckles blanched. I remembered the quiet mornings we once shared and let the memory pass like a car you do not step in front of. Then the sentence I will remember when I am old found the room. The court finds, as a preliminary matter for preservation and discovery, that the lottery proceeds are marital property, Judge Wright said. Neither party shall dissipate, transfer, or encumber assets derived from those winnings pending final distribution. Both parties will exchange full accountings within 14 days. The petitioner's request to preserve assets is granted. The words landed like a clean strike. Steel on nail, nail through wood, wood into something that would hold. The clerk read through the categories the order covered, and hearing the numbers felt like thunder. The house on Maple Street, appraised at about $550,000, was preserved. The new BMW, purchased for $85,000, was preserved. The deposit on the Winter Park condo was noted and preserved. Any account titled solely in Laura's name that held proceeds traceable to the winnings, preserved. Any luxury purchases over $2,000 are preserved. The words were dry, but the meaning was not. It meant my work, and the roof over that work could not be flipped into cash behind a closed door. It meant the rush to spend had met a stop sign painted by the court. I watched Laura swallow hard. Richard dabbed his forehead again. Margaret sagged back into the bench as if the wood had taken her weight. I sat and let the shape of fairness, not victory, settle across my shoulders. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I only breathed and listened to the scratch of the clerk's pen as she wrote the case number on the top page. Paper held the moment still. Laura made a sound that was more breath than voice. Daniel's jaw moved, but produced no words. Richard went a shade that would worry a doctor. Margaret placed her tissue on her lap and stared at it as if it had changed shape. Stephen whispered, "This is rigged," and the room let the whisper die on its own. Daniel asked for an allowance for reasonable living expenses. Thomas did not oppose the concept, and neither did the judge. She set an amount that matched a normal life, not a champagne life, and reminded both sides that the order was not a final distribution. Then Thomas addressed the envelope. He held it up for the record, described the timing, the accusations, and asked the court to admonish counsel. Daniel tried to style it as context. The judge's face did not change. "Counsel will confine communications to proper channels," she said. "Threats have no place in this courthouse." After the judge signed the order, the clerk handed Thomas a stamped copy. He slid it to me. The ink was still faintly damp. Words in the air are wind. Words on paper carry weight. I read the lines again and felt something inside me click back into place, like a door hung true at last. We stepped into the corridor. No reporters yet, only phones. Stephen lifted his to record, but Richard lowered it with a look that said, "Not now." Laura watched the floor tiles, white, gray, counting, the way she always counted when nerves ran ahead of sense. For a heartbeat, I wanted to tell her to breathe and drink water. The heartbeat passed. Choices have ripples. Some you ride, some you drown in. Outside, heat lifted off the sidewalk like a hand. Thomas stood with me under the small shade of the awning and laid out the next steps the way a foreman lays out phases. Discovery, depositions, possibly mediation. "They may offer a settlement," he said. "You will decide what you can live with. But today, changed leverage." "I felt it," I said. He nodded. "Good. Keep your quiet. Let paper do the talking." At my truck, a text from an unknown number waited. "You will pay for this." No name, no punctuation. I forwarded it to Thomas with a note. "From nowhere." He replied, "Save everything." I saved it. I have not gone back to the motel yet. I drove to the small park with the fountain that tosses water into the air and catches it again. I sat on a bench and watched a boy kick a ball against a wall and miss more than he hit. He kept going. An older couple walked by hand in hand, the kind of sight that can bruise and heal in the same minute. I unfolded the order and read it once more, then folded it as carefully as you fold a flag you love. I felt the knot in my chest loosen, not because victory had come, but because fairness had stepped into the room and sat down. Evening settled softly. Back in the room, I laid the order beside the prenup and the bank letters, edges aligned like tile. I washed my face, changed my shirt, and sat with a pen. I wrote one line at the top of a fresh page. They thought I would break. Then I wrote another. Instead, I bent the world back to level. I underlined the level and put down the pen. Near dusk, my phone lit up again. Laura. Not a call. A text. "Can we talk privately?" I stared for a long time. I could hear the tired bend in her voice even in those 4 words. I typed 3 replies and deleted them all. Finally, I wrote, "Please speak through counsel." I set the phone face down and let the room be quiet again. Sleep came like a slow tide. I lay there and replayed the day as if it were a series of plumb lines hung from rafters. Clause. Statements. Affidavit. Order. Silence. The look on Daniel's face when his own sentence was read aloud. Richard's handkerchief pressed again and again to his forehead. The mental picture of the BMW receipt with $85,000 printed in neat type. I told myself one sentence before I slept. They thought evidence would not find them. It did. At gray dawn, I stood by the window and watched the lot glow under sodium lights. A pickup, a sedan with a sunshade crooked in the windshield. I pressed my palm to the glass and felt leftover warmth. I whispered to Margaret because some habits anchor you. "We are getting there," I said. "It isn't finished, but we are getting there." Coffee strong enough to argue. Keys in hand. Back to Thomas's office to drop an extra copy and sign 2 more forms to speed record requests. He met me with that same quiet energy. "Small steps make big cases," he said, tapping the papers. Then he slid a thin envelope across the desk with a return address I recognized. The convenience store on Colonial had found partial footage from the afternoon of the purchase. A camera above the counter had caught a woman in a blue blouse paying with a card. The timestamp matched. You could not see the number she spoke, but you could see the card, and you could see the clerk press the lottery button. Thomas did not call it a victory. He called it corroboration. I liked that word. It sounded like lumber resting true on a beam. I left the office holding that envelope like a fragile thing that makes a strong thing stronger. The day felt brighter, not because the sun changed, but because the frame of the day shifted. We now had a clause, a pattern, an affidavit, a careless admission, and a slice of video. You do not need every joist to support a roof. You need enough, placed right. By afternoon, the clerk emailed a calendar. A new date has been set. Scheduled. Noticed. Words that feel mechanical and holy at once. I marked the square on a thin paper calendar in my wallet and ran a thumb along its edge. This is not the end, I told myself. This is the hinge. As the light went copper, I stood in the doorway of the room and watched the parking lot fill and empty. Cars came. Cars left. Lives went on. I thought about tomorrow and the weeks ahead and the next room where paper would speak again. I felt ready, not because I had grown stronger in a day, but because I had remembered something simple. I am not a guest in my own life. Now, feeling overlooked and treated unfairly is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and treated with respect, comment the keyword, justice. Now watch what they will do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I walked into the courtroom on that final morning with the same calm I had carried through the storm. The gavel struck once, and Judge Wright read her decision as if each word had been carved in stone long before today. She declared the lottery proceeds to be marital property. Half of the winnings, $4,050,000, were mine by law and by right. Laura would have to liquidate assets, sell what she had bought in a frenzy, and make good on the judgment. I sat still as the words fell. My chest rose once, slowly, and I let the breath stay inside a little longer than usual. It was not triumph I felt. It was released. That afternoon, I signed documents at Thomas Reed's office that transferred the funds into a secure trust account. Numbers scrolled across the page like highway mile markers, steady, real, undeniable. My share was no longer a dream or a threat. It was there, waiting for me to decide what kind of man I wanted to be with it. I did not want mansions. I did not want champagne or cars that shout your name down the street. What I wanted was something I could hold with calloused hands, something that felt like work, not luck. Within 2 months, I purchased a small construction company for $400,000. It had been faltering under poor management, but the workers were strong, skilled, and loyal. 35 men and women shook my hand on that first Monday morning, their faces showing both relief and hope. I told them, We build for families, not for glory. Every wall we raise is a promise kept. I felt something settle deep inside me, a rhythm I had missed since my younger days, swinging hammers and laying boards. The money had been born from betrayal, but I would turn it into shelter and wages, roofs and walls. For myself, I bought a modest home near Lake Eola Park in Orlando. It cost $250,000, a third of what our old house was appraised at. The floors creaked in the right places, the kitchen window opened to morning light, and from the porch I could hear children laughing in the park. That house did not boast. It breathed. I furnished it simply: a second-hand oak table, a pair of armchairs, and a desk where I could keep my papers aligned. The walls held only a few photographs: my wedding day, a fishing trip long ago, a picture of Margaret smiling on the porch swing before the world turned sideways. When I sat in that living room at dusk, the air soft and quiet, I thought, this is enough. This is peace. Meanwhile, across town, the cracks in Laura's new life spread wide. The BMW was the first to go, listed for sale at a loss. The Winter Park condo deposit was forfeited, and her dream of champagne neighbors turned to dust. Piece by piece, she sold the trappings of sudden wealth: handbags, jewelry, even the gold watch Richard had given her for their anniversary. She returned to her father's firm, earning $42,000 a year as a mid-level administrator. The same woman who once strutted into luxury boutiques now sat behind a desk under fluorescent light, filling out forms. I did not gloat. I only observed the symmetry of choices coming home. Richard, once the patriarch with a booming voice, walked smaller now. His name no longer opened doors. Friends avoided his gaze, whispers followed him at Rotary meetings, and the contracts his company once secured slipped away to rivals. Stephen, the son-in-law who loved to post photos of steak dinners and designer labels, stopped posting altogether. He drove a used sedan now, the kind with dull paint and a rattle in the wheel well. Their laughter, once sharp and mocking in my ears, faded into silence. They had built their house of cards, and the wind had come. One evening, as I sat at my oak table going over blueprints for a small veterans housing project, my phone buzzed. A message from Laura. It said only, "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I read it twice, maybe 3 times, and then I set the phone down. I did not reply. I had drawn my line, and I intended to keep it. Boundaries are not walls of anger, they are fences of self-respect. I told myself out loud, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. The words echoed in the quiet room, strong and true. Life began to feel light again. I rose early, walked the park paths as the sun rose pink over the water, and nodded to the joggers and old men feeding ducks. At the construction yard, I wore a hard hat and carried a clipboard, but I was never afraid to pick up a hammer. Work has its own kind of prayer, nails finding wood, beams lifting into place. The men started calling me boss, but it felt less like a title and more like a shared trust. I thought often about what all this had meant, about what betrayal had tried to teach me. The lesson was clear and sharp. A real family does not strip you of your dignity. A real family does not stand in your living room and tell you to leave. Real family holds you when storms come, not when fortune shines. Greed may dazzle for a season, but it will eat the hand that feeds it. Respect lasts. Greed does not. Some nights I sat on the porch and whispered to Margaret again, the way I had in my loneliest hours. We made it through, I told her. They tried to take what we built, but I'm still standing, and what I build now is for people who need it. The breeze lifted the leaves, and I let myself believe she heard. I stayed true to my decision. When Richard called once to clear the air, I told the answering machine, "Please direct all contact to my attorney." When Margaret sent a letter asking if I could forgive, I placed it in a drawer unread. When Stephen tried to corner me outside the courthouse after a follow-up hearing, I turned and walked the other way. Independence is not cruelty, it is clarity. And clarity was what I had fought for all along. One Saturday, I joined a group of volunteers building homes for veterans returning from service. We raised a small frame house, the kind with 2 bedrooms and a porch out front. The sun was hot, the lumber heavy, but the laughter was real. I nailed joists beside a young man with a limp and a tattoo that read, Semper Fi. When we stood back and looked at the frame, sweat dripping down our foreheads, I felt my chest expand with something pure. Betrayal had not ended me. It had redirected me. I was not just surviving, I was giving. As the roof trusses went up, I realized this was where my story would carry forward. Not in courtrooms, not in bank accounts, but in homes where families could rest safe. I smiled, broad and unguarded, the kind of smile that does not ask permission. I thought then of all the people watching stories like mine unfold, people who know too well the sting of betrayal, parents who gave everything only to be cast aside, children who worked for approval that they never received. Brothers and sisters are divided by inheritance papers. The truth I had learned was simple. Dignity is not given, it is claimed. Respect is not begged, it is demanded by how you carry yourself. And greed, no matter how loud, always crumbles. By the time the sun set, painting the sky orange and gold, I leaned against a new frame wall and let the air move easily through me. The day had been long, but the weight on my shoulders was gone. I was free. I whispered again, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. This time I didn't feel the sting. I felt strength. Looking ahead, I knew there were more projects to take on, more homes to raise, more nights to sit in my small house with quiet around me. There would be mornings in the park, afternoons in the yard, evenings at the oak table with blueprints spread wide. I would live in the rhythm of work and peace, not chaos and greed. And somewhere down the road, in Chapter 6, there would be a new thread, maybe a project, maybe a letter, maybe a face from the past. Something small, not a storm, but a ripple. A reminder that life does not end when family betrays you. It shifts. It tests. It asks who you will be when the floor gives way. And the answer, at least for me, was clear. I will be a builder. I will be a man who claims his own dignity. That night, as I turned off the lamp beside my bed, I whispered one last thought. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who guards your soul. Then I let the dark come, gentle and whole. The mornings feel different now. I rise before the sun, not because of worry, but because peace wakes me gently. My modest house near the park has become a kind of sanctuary. I brew a pot of coffee, step out onto the small porch, and watch the light stretch across the grass. The air is cool, carrying the sound of children laughing in the distance and dogs chasing balls in the dew. I no longer count losses, I count blessings. My company is steady, the men and women I hired walk tall knowing their jobs are secure, and I find purpose in knowing we are building roofs for families who might otherwise sleep under tarps. Each nail we drive into wood is another act of repair, not just for them, but for me as well. The money I fought for was not meant for silk ties or glittering cars. It was meant to build something that lasts. Every time I sit in the office of that small construction yard, with blueprints scattered across the oak desk, I remember how close I came to losing everything. Betrayal was meant to break me, but it handed me a mirror instead. It showed me who I was when stripped of comfort and pride, and what I see now is a man still standing, stronger because of the storm. That realization has become my anchor. I whisper sometimes, just to hear it out loud. I survived. Then I smile, because surviving is not all I did. I rebuilt. The lesson is sharper than any saw I ever held. For parents, it is this: never allow your children or relatives to belittle the sacrifices you made for them. We pay tuition, we cover rent, we help with weddings, and too often we let gratitude slip into entitlement. A parent's love should not be mistaken for a blank check. To my fellow fathers and mothers listening, remember this: your worth does not shrink because your children forget it. Protect what you built for yourself as much as for them. For children, the lesson cuts another way. Entitlement, greed, and ingratitude always carry a price. When you take without giving back, when you betray the hands that lifted you, the world will eventually collect its debt. My daughter-in-law and her husband learned that the hard way. They had it all in their hands and chose deception. Today they walk with lowered eyes, stripped of the very pride they thought money could buy. Respect for parents is not an old-fashioned idea. It is the foundation of character. Ignore it, and sooner or later, you will stand on sand. As for the world we live in today, the truth is even starker. Greed has a way of showing us what lies beneath the surface. People can wear masks of kindness, of sophistication, of love even, but when money arrives, the mask often slips. In this modern life where headlines are filled with scams, lawsuits, and betrayals, the core of a person is revealed by how they treat those closest to them when temptation knocks. Some crumble, some stand, and in that divide you find the real measure of a soul. I hear now and then updates about Laura. She rents a small apartment on the edge of town, far from the boutiques she once paraded through. The BMW is gone. The condo never materialized. She works in an office that pays $42,000 a year, answering phones, filing papers. I am told she tried to reach me. Letters slipped into my mailbox, calls that showed her name, but I did not answer. Richard, once proud and loud, no longer commands respect at the Rotary Club. Contracts have dried up, whispers follow him like shadows, and even old friends have stepped away. Their fall was not dramatic, no flames or headlines. It was slow erosion, dignity draining away drop by drop until only silence remained. I did not cause their suffering, their choices did, and though part of me feels pity, a stronger part feels the steady hand of justice. I keep the line drawn. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. To answer their calls would be to reopen wounds that no longer bleed. So I stay quiet, reminding myself, I don't need their apologies. I have my life. One late afternoon, as I sorted through a stack of papers in my office, I found a letter tucked under the door. It wasn't from Laura or Richard. It was from an old friend named Henry, a man I once swung hammers beside when we were just starting. He wrote about a new project, building homes for the homeless veterans in our county, and asked if I would lend a hand. I sat with that letter for a long time, running my fingers over the ink. Here was a chance to take what had nearly destroyed me and turn it outward, to build not just for profit but for healing. I folded the letter carefully and whispered, yes. The following Saturday, I stood among volunteers at a muddy lot where the foundations had just been poured. The smell of fresh lumber filled the air. A young veteran with a prosthetic leg lifted beams with a grin, sweat running down his brow, determination in his eyes. We laughed, we hammered, we measured twice before cutting once. The rhythm of work bound us together. At the end of the day, when the skeleton of a home stood against the sunset, I felt something deep and quiet. Like Margaret herself was there, smiling at me from the porch she never got to see. I walked home that evening lighter than I had been in years. The betrayal that once pressed on my chest like a stone had become fuel for a better fire. I whispered to myself, I finally found where I belong. Every day that passes proves I made the right choice. The words floated in the air like prayer. Each corner of my new life holds reminders of the journey. On my desk sits a worn pocket watch, the only thing my father ever left me. Its steady ticking reminds me that time is the one currency we cannot earn back, so we must spend it on what matters. On the porch, a small rocking chair faces the park. I sit there some evenings, listening to the cicadas sing, knowing I am exactly where I am meant to be. The story closes itself now, not with rage or court battles, but with clarity. The greatest asset any of us carries is not a house, not a bank account, not even a company. It is our character. That cannot be stolen, not by greedy relatives, not by smooth-talking lawyers, not by anyone. Betrayal may take money, but it cannot take the core of who we are. I will not answer Laura's letters. I will not return Richard's calls. That part of my life is finished. They chose their road, and I chose mine, and on mine I walk free. So I leave you with this, from my heart. Parents, protect your worth. Do not let sacrifice become a leash. Children, honor the ones who raised you, or the world will teach you lessons you wish you had learned sooner. And to everyone listening, in this modern world where greed whispers louder than gratitude, remember this: masks fall, but character stands. I whispered it once more as the sun rose the next morning, spilling gold across the park. Character is the only wealth no one can take from you. Then I smiled, because I knew the story was complete. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.